All right. Amazing. Matt, first of all, thank you again for jumping on. The reason I brought you on was because besides thinking you're a cool person, you have a pretty amazing business at a really young age. Can you tell people who are listening what your business is and how much you currently are making a month?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Matt. I'm the founder at a agency, Anivo Marketing. We do cold email outbound marketing services for like B2B companies. So essentially, we set up, send all those emails you might be getting in your inbox soliciting for business. So we do that for clients. I have a team of three now, so it's me and two other employees. And just last month, the business did a little bit plus or minus about 40 grand in revenue.
Insane. Okay. So 40 grand a month and you're how old?
Yeah, I'm 22 years old, just turned 22. So
Okay. Gotcha. So that's insane. Most people don't make that much money ever in their lives, let alone at 22. I'm curious, what do you think sets you apart from all the people that want to do it or have no idea that it's even possible? Like, why are you able to get these results when most people can't?
I would say, just big picture, a couple of things. I think that, the broader, if you were to just take like your average Joe, it's like they probably just don't even want to start a business, or they're more like unaware that that's even a possibility. Like if you talk, 90+% of the population works for another company, whatever. I would say that's probably like one driver. Of course, you can, and not all of that money is profit, granted. So there are jobs that definitely pay that. But I think that a lot of people just don't necessarily even like I'm sure if you ask someone like, "Hey, do you want to make $1 million?" Everyone would say yes, but few are even like interested on the intricacies. And then of the people who are interested in like actually dedicated to make a lot of money, it's probably just like time. It's like if I'm young in big picture, but um, little picture, like I've been doing business entrepreneurial stuff for on and off for 3 4 years, like aware of it for 6+ years beyond that, like actually like taking interest, taking initiative and whatever. So yeah, it's like big picture, I'm young in the grand scheme of things. This business has been around for a little over a year and a half, but I've invested like time wise probably similar amounts to other people making this revenue. So I think it's probably more so just like time effort thing, more so than like, you know, than really anything else. I think that like, I think it would be cliche to say, everyone's like, oh, anyone can do it if they want to. But for the most part, granted that, you're born in a country where you have, an internet connection, you speak English. I'm lucky enough to be born in the US. That if you really put a lot of time and effort and energy, you can make a business that does like relatively well by most people's standards in, a normal-ish amount of time.
Gotcha. Okay. So you've been doing business, you said you said you're aware of it for 6 years and then you've been doing it for how long?
I've been doing like going back into the history, so it's like I've been aware of business. Like I had friends back when I was like junior in high school. I had a couple of friends who like talked about like SMMA, or like they knew this kid who was 14 years old who like is making 10 grand a month doing whatever, selling marketing services whenever it's like a new thing. This was like, 2017 or something. Probably around there, maybe a little later. So I've been like exposed to it. We're recording this is 2024. So like timeline wise, that's what, 7 years of just like being broadly aware that that's even like a conceptual possibility. So I was like broadly aware of it for that long. And then, I didn't really try it. I saw my friends who are like cold calling businesses and like sending out like postcards, and like none of it really worked. But that kind of got me like intrigued of like, wait, there's people who make money like selling things online, but they aren't even like fulfilling the service. Like, that's kind of a crazy concept for a 14-year-old who made like 10 grand a month. Um, so when I heard that, I was kind of like inspired, and I started like keeping my eye on things where it's like, oh, I'd watch videos and it's like somewhat believed it was a possibility. But still at that point, I probably thought it was like, oh, that's just like a scam kind of, or like, yeah, it sounds interesting. Like it could be a possibility, but that also could just be like a total lie that some kid made up on the internet. yeah, like broadly aware of it for 7-ish years, the like online space. But then I really started getting like serious where I would say it's like I did business where I was like actually, pressing the buttons, doing stuff. Probably about, I don't know, I'd guess around like 3 years ago, maybe early 2021 is where I like seriously tried. Um, Made like a supplement store, tried that for like a year, like a full year, invested like 4 grand of my own money into that. And that just didn't work at all because I was just too dumb and like didn't understand what needed to be done to make that work. Which then later led into a lot of those skills led into this current business. But yeah.
Mm, okay. So it's interesting because when I asked what the main thing that sets you apart was, you referenced the time factor, which kind of makes me think that a big reason that a lot of people have the ambition to make it but don't is just that they don't stick with something long enough to make it work. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say so. That's what, like, when people say, like, when you ask like, okay, what sets you apart? I think that like the thing that most people are expecting is like, oh, I have some special trait. When I was 5 years old, I like did this thing, and the teachers praised me or whatever. It's like I really, and you're in some of the circles that I'm into where it's like you see people from a lot of walks of life like make it or whatever. Like, we're around a lot of young entrepreneurs, but the stereotype is a lot of the people who run businesses, they're older. So older people that are killing it, younger people that are killing it, people like there's people all across the globe, all different backgrounds, killing it. So what really stands me apart, I don't really think there is like a ton. It's just that it's like time. It's just I've been doing it for a minute.
Mm,
What I guess what stands me apart at 22 is that I've been doing it for, or aware of it for this long at 22. Most people when they're 22, they're at the phase I was at when I was like a junior in high school, or like 15, 16 years old, where it's like, oh, I just heard about it for the first time. And then like when I was 19-ish, that's when I started trying it myself. So it's kind of just like, age of when I like dip my toes into the water.
mm. Have you come across anyone who's been in the space that we're in, this kind of like solopreneur agency space, who's been trying the same thing for 5 years in a row and hasn't been successful?
Not that, like, I mean, it could be survivorship bias because like the circle, like the circle we're in, it's like there's a barrier to entry cost wise. So like if they weren't successful, they weren't paid for it. But I don't really think, off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone who's tried. Like when I say so like out of the period, let's say I'm assuming there's a 7 year long period, and I was even trying like other little business stuff that I could get into like before the supplement thing even. So I've been on and off trying, call it 3-4 years, right? I think that it would be, and then like internet money where I'm like actually trying with full attention, meaning like I dropped out of college. This is my full time thing for probably like a year and a half, right? I think it's pretty, if you dedicate your full attention, time, effort, energy. Let's say you had no other obligations. If you did it for 2 years, I think you'd have a hard time where you're not making like 10 grand a month. Like I don't even see how that could really be possible. And maybe to someone hearing this, that they're like, oh, that sounds crazy or whatever. But genuinely, it's like, okay, if you have 40 hours a week or more and you are actually like dedicated and motivated to doing it every day, and you're selling a service that costs $2,500 a month, you only need 4 people, right? Like you can get 4 people over a span of, there's people we know, they get 4 people in their business over a span of a month, right? So if you have 2 years, like that's more impossible. um
Mm,
Granted, you have to learn all that stuff, but all that to say is that, to answer your original question, it's like I think I don't know anyone who's like tried business with like, and you can get into the weeds of what tried means. My definition of tried might be different than other people's, but done it for an extended period of time and not seen, results that would be considered significant by most people.
yeah. Oh, that makes sense. What's interesting, and for people who don't have this context, we're in the same mastermind group where Matt is actually a coach who teaches cold email and is also helping coach me on how to build a similar business, or actually the exact same business essentially. And one thing that you mentioned to me the other day that stuck with me was you were talking about how important it is to make sure that you're not deluding yourself into thinking that you're doing a lot of work to move your business forward when actually you're maybe more in like a thinking, pondering, strategizing mode. And you mentioned, yeah, it's really about measuring your productivity by the outputs that you're actually doing, like how many cold emails did you send, DMs, whatever. And you can extrapolate that to any business, whatever your actual productive output looks like. I'm curious how you went from being someone who is maybe more of a heady cognitive overthinker type to someone who is able to do the amount of concrete radical action that you have to do every day to get to where you are.
Yeah, and going off of that thing, like whenever we had that conversation, I wrote a tweet right after, just like basically the same thing, kind of outlining that, like exact
Nice.
same stuff. Yeah, and for context, yeah, it was like basically just stop thinking and start like doing, and that took me a long time to kind of like drill into my head. I would say that the way that I just did that is it's sheer going back to like what it takes to win and what it is it's just like time, right? Obviously there's difference like if there's people who have done things for a long time and haven't seen success because their outputs, weren't there, whatever, they weren't like focused. Obviously you have some leverage if you're, if you're 150 IQ, I'm sure you can get more done than if you're 100 IQ or whatever by that metric is too. But whenever you do something for a period of time, you just start picking up on the nuances and getting better at it. Like I was terrible at focusing when I was, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, relative to now. And 2 or 3 years from now, I hope I look back on myself now. I'm like, man, I was terrible at focusing or I was terrible at getting stuff done. So I think it's just a muscle that you flex with time. Just like when you're in kindergarten, doing addition for the first time like sucks is an impossible. And like whenever if you talk to someone who's 10 years older, you're like, how do you do addition so fast? It's like you just do it a million times, right? Or you're encountering the same problem over and over and over again. And at a certain point, you're just like sick of it and you make some sort of change. So um, yeah, I would say a lot of the habits and muscles developed again is just like a time thing. Like you just do something for so long. You sit in the chair for so long and you've clicked on the Twitter tab 18 times, too many in that same day, and you're like, wait a minute, this enough is kind of enough, right? Or you've done that for the last 2 years, and you're like, okay, we gotta chill out here. So yeah, a lot of the habits are just formed with time, effort, concerted energy, and just raw like doing it for long enough and banging your head against the wall. So a lot of these aren't like magic habits or magic things that you pick up. I'm sure if you watch like YouTube videos, like Sam Ovens, Sam Ovens posts a lot of good stuff on like focus and whatever. And I'm sure if I consumed that earlier, that would help me. But a lot of like getting stuff done just took like me banging my head against the wall for 6 months, looking back and being like, wait, it felt like I did a lot of work. But then I looked at the outputs. It's like I made like two VSLs and like ran ads. Like that's literally it. Like two,
Mm-hmm.
500 people saw my product. Of course, zero people bought, right? Like you just kind of come to those realizations after banging your head against the wall for 6 months or having someone ahead of you just like point out and be like, of course, like the reason people have this notion where it's like, oh, my business isn't working. I have to change something. I have to do whatever. And it's like, wait a second, like zoom out and look at what you tangibly did. It's like you got in front of 5,000 people, right? It's like I get in front of 5,000 people a day, or like my clients, we send 10,000 emails a day, right? So that's like what you felt like you did a lot in 2 weeks. Or I'm not saying like you specifically, but fictitious person. It's like you just have to look at the magnitudes of like what it takes to win. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think a lot of people, including myself, get really caught in that spiral where our focus is just fucked. Like we're in this social media age and it's so easy to be doing something and then almost unconsciously I have this thing where I have like command TYOU, which is just like new tab
Yeah.
YouTube. And so it took me a long time, like years on years on years, to start to actually address that. And I noticed that for me, it took actually getting softwares like Freedom, paying for that, where I literally, it's like an unconscious tick. I do like new tab YOU, and then the Freedom app comes up, and it's like, you are free from YouTube. go live a wonderful life or something. And and I noticed such a distinct difference. Like if I wake up in the morning and I set like a 9 hour freedom blocker for all of my social media apps, my day flows so differently than if I don't do that. And one interesting thing that I noticed recently was actually that when I starve my dopamine receptors from, in a healthy way from not receiving those inputs, I go through this interesting phase where for like 20 minutes I'm good. And then I start to feel this kind of gnawing feeling of the kind of like rat brain start to be like, where's my, where's my treat? And then after I go through that agitation stage, it kind of builds up and needs to be released in some way. And I notice that I go then towards creating to fill that void.
Hmm.
And I thought that was kind of a profound experience of like, oh, I can't watch YouTube. I'm going to make a YouTube video, which is so much more aligned with my life goals. And so, yeah, I throw that out there for anyone listening who feels like the sheer willpower of just realizing, like, oh, I'm in this cycle of pain, but I keep doing it to myself every single day. I find that actually creating environmental factors that are concrete blocks that make it so willpower is out of the equation and you just are forced to do the right thing has been really helpful.
Yeah, I was going through this exact thing, or just like yesterday, even or today. I have a lot of that stuff set up where it's like I remove all social media from my phone. I used to use Snapchat with like friends and stuff. I just deleted that, and it's like, oh, we're using iMessage now because there's just too much distraction on it. But even there's like so many micro nuances to that. Like I used to have an issue, or I still kind of do, where it's like, okay, let's say you block YouTube, but then there's that one time where it's like, okay, I need to use YouTube in a productive way. And then you trick yourself into like unblocking it, and then you like still see all the garbage that draws you back in. And so it's like you have to like, okay, so I need to keep YouTube enabled, but then I need to you find the extension that covers the recommended tab, and so my recommended tab is blocked, and my subscribe tab and whatever. It's like all these different things. But yeah, it's definitely you have to just craft your environment because your willpower gets exhausted. You need to just set your environment up in a way that it's not constantly tested, because if you constantly test someone with something, it'll break. There's like a study, I think about this a lot, where it's like they put people in a room for 30 minutes with a chair and a button that shocks them and nothing else, right? And that's the only option they had. But since they're just exposed to it for 30 minutes and they got so bored, like 80 or 90% of the participants press the button knowing that it causes like pain, right? That like they're going to get shocked. There's multiple participants that just press it multiple times. It's just because it's exposed, you have the option to do it. And when you're
Mm,
exposed to it enough times, then you're eventually in a cave. So yeah, I mean, there's so many layers of focus. That's another reason why I don't think people like make it, is because they sit down, they try and work for 8 hours. In reality, they work for like legitimately probably 30 minutes, if that, right? And then at the end of it, they feel like they went through all these thinking cycles of like, how are they going to do business? And they watch the video that they didn't mean to watch, and then they go back, and then they don't get anything done. And they feel like they did a lot of work. And yeah.
legit. Yeah. I had a I've been doing this thing with some of my friends where and my girlfriend too, where we lovingly kind of create a space for ourselves to say out loud some honest truths about ourselves. We're not critiquing the other person. We're just kind of airing out our own truths to each other that we're kind of uh, n- I I don't know if ashamed of is the right word, but maybe ashamed of. Like you shouldn't be doing it, but you are anyway. And one of the ones that I had on a conversation with my friend a few months ago, I was like, I'm actually positive I'm more dedicated to consuming YouTube videos than anything else in my life. Like I put more focus on just consuming content with the vague idea that it's helping me in some way than actually putting time into my business. And that was such a my friend was like, "Are you serious?" I was like, "Yeah, dude. It's bad."
Yeah.
So
And it can definitely feel like and I'm the same way too. I could sit and binge YouTube hours or YouTube videos for like 8 hours, 10 hours, no friction. But when I try and do work, there's so much friction. It's just because it's easier. Like it's so easy to sit and you just unplug your brain. Like you sit and you just consume. You plug your brain into this video and you just enjoy it. versus when you do work, it's so tough. Like no one talks about it. It's like you sit down and you're like, okay, what do I actually need to do? And then you're like, okay, I need to create this campaign. You're like, okay, well then to create the campaign, I need to write the copy. And it's like, wait, but then I forgot to ask the client about this. So then you have to draft the email. And like you go through like 3 layers of that and you're like, fuck, I just want to watch like a YouTube video. Like that's
Yeah.
just how it goes. Even though deep down, like your desire is that you don't want to be, or maybe you do, but like I don't want to be watching YouTube videos for 12 hours a day. It's like, okay, well, I have to, you default to going to that very often, but you just have to, re-sign yourself and be like, okay, I know this is painful, but it's for a cause. And yeah.
Yeah. I'm really curious how you manage that in your own agency. We'll get a little granular here on cold email marketing agencies where, you know, the goal is essentially to book as many meetings for your clients as possible by setting up a ton of inboxes, ton of email accounts, and reaching out to their target market and booking meetings. And it can be fairly logistically intense to do that for, even once you have 2 3 clients. You have close to 20, if not more than 20 at this point,
Yeah, a little
and
over 20.
a little over 20. And so, and your team is not that big. And so I'm curious, just from a operational standpoint, like how are you doing it?
Yeah, it's like one of those things where the way you do it is just tons of time of like micro optimizations over and over and over again for a year and a half, and then you're like, oh, I can do it. The way that I'm doing it now is I just brought on a team member to actually do all the fulfillment because I'm doing the fulfillment, the sales, the content marketing, the strategy, like client calls, everything, and it's just extremely exhausting among the other responsibilities I have. Um, so now, or like what I did, I managed 15 clients. I could still manage the 20 clients. I just wouldn't be able to grow by doing that. But the way you do it is just a lot of doing. Like you just do it so many times that it starts to become second nature. Like you can seriously, this isn't true for everything, but a lot of like computer stuff, like when you're on the computer for so long, you can do things at like potentially orders of magnitude faster if you just do it enough times. Like if you're, just like you see a skilled tradesman who you look at like a carpenter and they can build a house or, build the walls and all this stuff. And me who's never done it, it would literally take me 10 times longer to do it. But since they've done it 200 times, they can do it, the 201st time way easier because you learn all the little micro hacks. Same is true with cold email. It's like the first time I wrote a script, it took me 2 hours. The last time I wrote a script, it takes me 10 minutes, right? Because I just know all the things to say and how to frame it and whatever. The first time I, scraped a lead list and how to format it, it took me 30 minutes. Now when I do it, it takes me 2, right? Because I know all the Excel shortcuts and all the faster ways to do it and why things are the way they are. So yeah, again, it's just like the way that you do it is just raw volume. Like if you just do something so many times, you learn all the micro optimizations, you learn all the BS that needs to be cut, you learn the important stuff, you learn the 80/20. And then now I'm at the point where after I have that refined process, I'm hiring on a new person. And that's been a whole experience where it's like talking to a person who's done it from zero. I'm like, oh, you can get this done in like 45 minutes. And to me, I'm like, oh, that's going to plenty of time. But then when they do it, it takes them an hour and a half. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, because I forgot that, like when you start from zero, it takes you so long to do things. So the way you get efficient with things is just do it a bazillion times and you're going to learn all the micro hacks.
Mm.
Like
When you
it,
were Go ahead, were you going to finish the
yeah.
point?
I was just going to say the last thing. The first thing came to mind is like changing oil. Like if I had to change the oil on my car, I've done that like maybe one time. Like that would be such a pain in the ass. But if you just go to an oil change shop, they do it in like 5-10 minutes because they just have all the setup. Like they have the thing when you drive over the oil machine, there's a guy literally under your car, like wait, they don't even have to jack up the car. That's the type of things in the same way in a business that you set things up in a way that instead of it, if you do it the manual way, it takes you 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, but then you just align things in a way that can take you a fifth or a tenth of the time. So
Mm. Just to paint a picture here for the cold email people, agency people listening, when you had, say, 13 clients and you were basically a one man operation and you had, 7 new campaigns that needed to go out that week. Are you are you batching your activities? Like you're like, okay, I'm going to go on Apollo and scrape 7 lead lists, and then I'm going to go into Google Drive and open 7 documents and write 7 scripts, and then you just like do each thing for each person, or how does your structure work in that way?
No, I would just do it all one at a time, just like start to finish for each person, just making because there's some stuff that it's like you get to a certain point and then you need like client intervention, and so you have to get it to that point first, and so a lot of it is just doing it end to end and just getting really fast at it because you've done it. Like I've launched hundreds of campaigns, so the hundred, like 205 campaign number 205 is going to take me next to no time, right?
Mm, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So w- one thing that's interesting is, you mentioned Sam Ovens. He has a video where he talks about the importance of basically loving what you do to be successful.
Hmm.
Would you say that you love cold email? Like you love running an agency?
I Yeah, I'd say I love running an agency. I wouldn't say like I like cold email just because I've done it for so long. But
Mm,
I'm not like in love. Like if I let's say cold email died tomorrow, and let's say you gutted my business and replaced it, and it's old Google Ad stuff, like I would have probably similar amount of enjoyment. I think I like macro is I like time freedom. I like to control my own destiny, and I like uncapped potential, right? One thing I hated about my old job is an IT job. And I think for the most part, nobody's in love with IT. Nobody's in love with, and maybe there's some sick freak out there that I'm sure loves, plugging computers in or whatever. But I like all the things around it. And then to get all those things, you have to do the micro things. I think even Sam Ovens talked about in that video where it's like, I love running a business. Does that mean I love cleaning every single company name to remove LLC and Inc. from the thing? I don't do that anymore, but I did do that in the past. Did I love doing that? No, I hated doing that. But I love the macro. I love the war, not the battle, right? Like I love the
mm,
macro. The micro is it's just cost of doing business. I would argue that there's probably close to nothing. If there's someone out there that has something where you like every single thing, then more for you. But I like the macro thing and all the micro things, of course. I don't like, having to think about bookkeeping and accounting. I don't like having to do all these other things are required of a business, but I love the macro thing. So all those things I could, I just do it because it's part of the game.
yeah. But the part that you actually do love, the war, is like building businesses, or what part do you actually feel like you love?
I would say it's having I I feel like I like having something that you can get really first, I like making money. I'll say that, right? If this was like not tied to money, I probably wouldn't do it. Second thing I like doing is things that have really complex and like nuanced thing, like solutions or whatever. So if I like, because I thought about this too. It's like if I worked at a company and the company gave me the autonomy to manage a department and I was making a similar amount of money and I could have a clear path to making as much as I want within the confines of that company, I wouldn't mind working for someone else. What I like is being able to get super, super, super deep and intricate into something. And I like, having the uncapped earning potential to where it's like I am in control of my own destiny. So if I can do something twice as fast, right? Then I can make twice as much money. Or if I figure out a way to sell people better, like I know I'm the best sales guy, I'll close more deals. I like having that like competition because whenever I worked at my old positions, I hated how monotonous it was. It didn't matter your output, it mattered your hours. So it's like if you showed up there, you get paid by the hour. If I literally did 5x the output of my coworkers, maybe at the end of the year you'd get a 5% raise, right? Versus now, if I do a 5x output compared to someone else, I'm going to make 5x the money, maybe even 10x because, people are going to want the quicker, better guy, right? So that's what I love about it. I love being in control of my own destiny. I love the autonomy and freedom this gives me. And I also like just nerding out and like competitiveness. I don't
Hmm.
the job that I worked at was so soul sucking because I didn't have a reason to do better than the other person. And I like, working and doing better than other people. So I like the competition too.
Sure. That makes sense. Do you feel like you're motivated by a specific why? Like, do you have an end definition or vision of what success looks like for you where you're like, all right, fuck yeah, I did it?
I think in the beginning, like, so 7 years ago, when I was looking back at like business, I read this book. It was like, forgot what it's called. It's by MJ DeMarco, something business, Millionaire Fastlane. There's another one called like Unscripted, one or both of those books. And the whole concept of the book was that like effectively like running your business was like the fastest way to financial freedom, and that like working a job, whatever, sucks. Which isn't, I've come to the conclusion after all this that like there's a lot of pros to working a job, and not, I could see myself working a job within the right standards. But going back to like the end goal, at the time it was financial freedom. I thought like when I was 16, 17, it's like I want to be retired by 30. Like, because I loved playing video games at the time. So it's like, man, I could just sit at home once I'm 30, I could just do whatever I want. And so I did. That was my conception at that time, was I want to be financially free as soon as possible. I still think that's kind of the end goal. Not that what I've matured and realized though is that when I hit that nest egg, let's say I have 5 million liquid that, is producing a, $200,000 yearly completely passive salary that I can bank on for the rest of my life. That whenever I get to that point, I probably will still want to work. I probably will just have more autonomy. That it's like, if a client that I hate, or like someone that like they pay me money or whatever that I didn't want to work with, I just like, gone, whatever. I just have a little bit more wiggle room to live my life more in alignment with the way I want to. But for the most part, in the beginning, it was about financial freedom, giving myself autonomy, getting to the point to where I could do whatever I want as soon as possible. Now it's more about um, still like money, kind of getting all those things in place, getting my ducks in a row. But now it's just like build the concept of like building and growing and ascending in that way is also fun. It's like whenever you build bigger, then you're surrounded by more high level people. A lot of the really high level people are really cool, and it's just kind of building that way. So a lot of it is financially motivated, transparently. But now that I've done it for a little bit, I don't think I'm going to stop once I hit like a number, you know.
Hmm. Yeah. How do you avoid the trap of getting comfortable with where you're at and then plateauing in your development?
I I don't know. Honestly, I think that big picture, let's say someone out there was making, I don't know, 10 grand a month, right? And a lot of these circles that you're around, you're like, oh, that's too little. You shouldn't settle for any less than 100, right? Like keep growing, growing, growing. But if you like spending time with your family and 10 grand a month is cool for you, then there's no reason why you should. Like, there's no reason why you should stop being complacent, whatever. Like, that's just the hustle culture ism. Like, if you like doing stuff, then who cares? Whatever. Like, if you like that amount of money, you like it. For me, I self regulate a lot where it's like I hit a certain revenue number and I'm like, I want more. And so then that pushes, like, I don't get comfortable because I'm just like, it feels cool for a little bit, like a couple weeks. It's like, wow, I hit a new number. And then it's like, well, my vision is here and I'm here. So I still want to grow. Another thing that's really helpful too is pain, right? Like what I've noticed is some of my biggest jumps are whenever I put my back against the wall a little bit. Like whenever I drop, so I was doing business, I did that supplement thing for like a year, but I was in college still and I still had a job. And
Mm,
part of the reason why it wasn't successful was a lot of other reasons, like, oh, I was taking up time from whatever and whatever. But one of the main macro things is that I had an out. That wasn't my only thing. Like, I could lose the 4 grand and still be okay. But if I put myself in a position where if I lost the money, I wouldn't be okay, and that's an arbitrary thing at the end of the day too, then you're going to be a lot more invested. So that's helped a lot. Whenever I dropped out of college and quit my job, that was when everything started working. And then things started working more when I spent the money on joining a mastermind. And it was an uncomfortable amount of money for me at the time, but that's what made me use it. And then whenever I moved out, now I had rent, and that fostered like a lot of my growth spurts have come from spending more or cutting something off that was very uncomfortable and forced me to like, do more.
mhm. Yeah. Just candidly, that's something that I notice I feel challenged by in my own business development is that I want in my mind to be this person. I have this vision of myself stepping out of a cool car and looking out over the city and just feeling like I'm channeling this power that comes from this years of accruing focus and like knowing where I'm going and who I am. And then when I really think about it, I'm like, okay, all of the times where I've really made growth spurts has been to avoid pain. I was in a terrible job. I needed to get out of it. I started a business and it worked. And I was like, whoa, okay. That was a massive jet fuel propulsion to a next level. And then I feel like now I'm kind of getting in this place where I'm just kind of doing enough to keep myself at a margin above like a pain threshold rather than having this grand why that I'm moving towards and being fully positively motivated. And so that's where some of these questions come from. They're selfishly for my own insight of feeling like, damn, how do you find a why if the business if business itself is not necessarily like this incredibly enticing thing and the actual nuances of it can be very tedious, but I want the result that it brings. Can be hard to know how to be motivated in a positive direction rather than just by avoiding negative situations.
It's not a bad. I think it's not a bad thing to be avoided by negative situations. Like that's just a stronger motivator. It's a more easy lever to pull. Like if I put it's like, oh, I don't want to run right now. Well, if I put a lion next to you, like you're going to run. Like there will be everything in you will be run. You're not going to think about anything. You're not going to think about cold email because it's such a pain. You're going to die if the lion comes and gets you.
Right.
But if I said like, "Hey Nico, if you do all these like micro intricate things, at the end of it, you can get a Lamborghini Huracan." It's like, okay, that sounds cool, and then you go 3 layers deep, and you're like, actually, I want to go back and watch YouTube, right? Because it's not whatever. So I think that pain is a great motivator. I think that in the beginning, it's a fallacy that you need a why. Like your why can just be, I don't want to be broke. Like that's my why right now. Is like I don't want to default on my rent payments. And I know like I'm not I'm a psychopath in a different way that I like for me to default on my rent payments would be like at this point it would be crazy to happen, but that still kind of lingers in the back of my mind because I think this is one of the traits of like a lot of successful people is that they are very like I don't know if neurotic is the right word, but like and a lot of them aren't necessarily, but they tie a lot of they're more agitated by pain than most people, right? Like they're not content. I get not content probably a lot easier than other people do. Like people can just be
Mm,
like, oh, they get in a scenario and they're very happy with it. Like what we were talking about earlier. Like if you're happy with the way that you are now, you're not going to change. But if I said, hey, Nico, like start paying 5 grand a month for a Miami, condo. You're going to figure it out because that takes away all your cash flow. And then now you're like in a position where it's like, how do I afford food? I'm going to go into debt. I don't want to go into debt. Like all the things around me, it's like, I don't want you set things up. So it's like, you just don't want the negative outcome. And then that pushes you in the pot. Like I hire this employee. That's a huge expense. I'm like, shit, I have to make that money back. And now I'm like really motivated to do more work. So yeah, I think for the short term, like it's unrealistic for most people to just be like, wow, I'm super motivated to do this grand vision because you get kind of content or whatever, and you realize that actually I don't really even care that much about whatever that big thing. I just want to eat and I want to have a good life and whatever. But then you use
mm.
pain to kind of push you closer towards those things. So
Yeah.
you don't need and the other thing too is you can find your vision 10 years from now, right? Let's say you're really, let's say someone's politically motivated, right? They're super right leaning, left leaning, whatever. It's like use business as a way to get yourself financially successful enough that you can do that all day, right? And you can learn and figure that out. But using this as just a vehicle in a very pragmatic way to just acquire the goods and the capital to be able to do whatever you want in the future. So All that to say, I don't think you need a why. I think pain is a great motivator, and I don't think you should like negatively associate that, especially in the beginning. Like 10 years down the road, if you're like you're a deca millionaire, and like the thing that's just motivating you is pain. So it's like, okay, you can take a step back and like think about your actions and where you actually want to go. But
Mm,
short term, you're going to need money, right? And you're not going to be in a bad spot if you have 5 million saved up in 10 years or something. So
yeah. Yeah, I feel that. I was talking to my girlfriend the other day about how interesting it is to live a life where so many of our decisions are dictated by the paradigm of capitalism basically, and we just have to make money, and it becomes a situation where so many people are doing so many things that they don't want to do because they just don't want to die basically.
mhm.
And I don't necessarily have a question or a point tied to that so much as it's just an interesting thing to ponder. I don't know if it's a helpful thing to ponder because it's kind of like the system is what it is. But I guess on some level, I have this vision of like a world where we're not making our decisions. We're not like leapfrogging in our lives based off of like running from one anxiety to the next or one survival based avoidance to the next. And I noticed when I thought about it too much, it got me really in my head. And I was like, damn, we're in this paradigm that's totally financially ruled. And basically, the only ways that I can see out of it are you have to find a way to be comfortable within the game. And that could either mean you accept working a job that pays you very little or some moderate amount, but you have amazing work life balance and you like the job to a decent extent, or you grind pretty damn hard and you make enough money that you can kind of exist at the top of the game and almost like pop out of it in a certain way. Um, and and it just seems like a cheat code if you're a kind of person who has found something that they're really passionate about that also makes them a ton of money and allows them to ascend out of this kind of rat race game. So I'm
I
curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I disagree with the notion that your likes and dislikes are objectively rooted, right? So I think all the things you're hinging on is that, like, okay, let's say that like you like fishing, right? Like I love going out and fishing every day. Well, why do you like fishing? Well, the reason why you probably like fishing is when you're 5 years old and you and your uncle went out, you fished every day for 3 years, and that's just what you did, right? And if you go back to like cavemen times, none of those cavemen liked driving Lamborghinis and smoking cigars and smoking weed all day or whatever because they weren't even exposed to that. A lot of your likes are just it's similar to like ads and impressions, right? Like the things that you like are very tied to how many impressions you have of them. I would wager that if you just did something for a long time, you would like it. With certain exceptions, like you could say some people are genetically predisposed to like certain things, not like certain things, or blah blah. You can get into the weeds with it, but I think the concept, I think that a lot of people have issues with work or like they think that like work is an unenjoyable thing. When I think people kind of get in their head or get in their own way about that, where it's like, no, I don't hate work. I hate my boss, and my boss is an asshole. And maybe if I had a better manager, I would like this job. Um, or yeah, it's like with the cold email stuff. I learned to just do you think I love like going in and adding these DMARC records and DKIM records? Like, no, I like the macro thing, and the macro thing like motivates me and propels me because I found some level of meaning in getting financial freedom. I think like honestly, I would be more if I was in a situation where I had like $10 million and I couldn't work on a business. I'm sure I'd find something else to attach meaning to. But if I lost the business, the pain, so to say, of needing money, I'd probably be depressed for a period of time because I don't I don't have something wake up to look forward to or something. I would have to like redefine what I like associating my time with. So I think that like a lot of those, because it's like you go on Netflix for a while and then you get bored and depressed. Like I'm sure you've had it. I've been on like summer vacation in school, and like in the beginning it's like fun, and then it starts to like regress where it's like you're spending 8 hours like watching a TV and you're like, I feel like shit, you know?
Mm,
So that pain, it's almost in an inadvertent way. Like you kind of revolve to homeostasis. Like whenever you force yourself into pain, you derive joy from it in like a deeper level. And when you force yourself into joy by like doing drugs, watching TV and doing all these things, your body naturally like reverts you to a more like depressed state. So I think regardless of what you do, it's just the issue is more so your conception about how you're supposed to feel about a certain thing rather than the actual thing. I don't know.
mm.
This is getting really philosophical and like layers deep, but I think that all that to say is that I don't think your likes and dislikes are objective, and I think that you can find meaning in pain. And in a roundabout way, the pain can bring you pleasure if you just let it and enjoy the like accept the process and don't judge yourself for that.
Mm.
But maybe I'm sick in the head, so I don't know.
No, I think that's
Yeah.
really profound. I find that with this is a kind of a cliche at this point, but with cold plunging, for example, it's like you put yourself through 3 minutes of icy misery, and then the rest of your day feels like dopamine bliss. So, yeah, that makes sense. On a philosophical level, I know you mentioned to me outside the podcast that you meditate. You've been doing it for like 5 years to some degree. Do you consider yourself to be a spiritual guy in some capacity? Are you religious?
I would say that I grew up Catholic, and then I kind of like I don't know. There's like a lot of things where I kind of just like fell out of faith in like the more traditional respect. I would say I'm like spiritual to some degree. I think that I don't have like I don't know if even agnostic is the right term. It's just like I don't know. I would say I'm somewhat spiritual.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's any. I don't subscribe at least now to some like traditional faith whatever structure, but I'm not opposed to like a lot of the religious ideas. I think a lot of them have a lot of value.
Sure. Have you been exposed to any Eastern philosophy, like non-dual spirituality and things of that nature?
Yeah, I used when I was in like high school. I read there's this guy like Krishnamurti. He was like
Uh,
some Eastern. I read like a few
yeah.
books on like Eastern spirituality, um, which I thought was somewhat interesting. Like if again, I'm not super spiritual, but I like a lot of like the Eastern ideas around just like I don't know. A lot of like the Eastern philosophical ideas, I feel like I kind of agree with, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm always curious how people relate to that because I recently read this book. Well, actually, it was several years ago, but it's a book that has always been top of mind called The Most Direct Means to Eternal Bliss. And the book basically describes a style of meditation called the awareness of awareness meditation, where you sit there and you just focus on the fact that you're aware rather than any of the phenomenon occurring in your experience. You're just bring your attention over and over back to I am aware. And I noticed that in doing that myself, it was interesting to find going into these meditative, almost transcendental states that feel very expansive and sort of redefined my outlook on like what it means to be happy. I know that sounds kind of vague, but it showed me pretty clearly that there's no like outer configuration of physical reality with like money or family or whatever that will necessarily then equal happiness. There needs to be this inner dimension where one finds fulfillment. The book basically describes that like happiness and fulfillment are qualities of our inner nature, and in order to experience them we need to actually recognize that those are like embedded in the fabric of who we are.
Hmm.
And so I'm always curious, sometimes I think, oh, these people who are really successful entrepreneurs, I feel like if they took a fraction of their energy and directed it inward towards these kind of things, then we'd have some really powerhouse people that are both really really powerful at like moving money and making change in the outer world, and shaping markets and the globe, but also people who are really profoundly deep. And and yeah, so I was just curious what your relationship to that is.
Yeah, I think a lot of really what's interesting to maybe this isn't true, or at least I feel like this is true, is a lot of really successful people are multifaceted. Like if you read Steve Jobs' autobiography, like he had a lot of Eastern spirituality influence. Like there's a lot of these guys. It's like Jeff Bezos, like oh, it's the Amazon guy, but he was like PhD in physics. Like that guy's like a genius. Like a lot of these guys do have a lot of these multifaceted worldviews.
Mm,
And yeah, with spirituality, I there's one thing you said reminded me. There's book Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. In the book, there's one quote that kind of encapsulated it. It was like a quote somewhere in the book talked about like some monk, right? And he was trying to find enlightenment and like what that even meant or whatever. And like all them, he was like trying to meditate and did all this time, whatever effort, energy. And then he was at like a butchery and he was observing someone in line asking the butcher, and he asked the butcher, he said, you know, what are your best meats? Like, give me your best meat. And the butcher said, all of our meats are our best meats. And the yogi in that moment was enlightened. And the meaning behind all of that is that like joy and a lot of these things, they are subjective, they are inward because two people can have the exact same thing happen to them, but they perceive it in a different way, which informs the reality. Like a great example is if there's someone who's a millionaire and you give them $1 million, they will feel happy, but they won't feel as happy as someone who has $0 and you give them $1 million. When in reality, like the objective, what you gave them is the same. Another example, if you look at like a pharaoh in Egypt, right? They feel like they're the king of the world. They're so, happy or whatever. Um, and they feel like they're the top of the world, they're the best. And then in today's day, there's someone who could be lower middle class that objectively has more resources than them. They have air conditioning, they have internet, they have all these technologies the pharaohs never had, right? But they feel subjectively terrible because they're looking outwardly and saying, like, oh, in the relation on the totem pole, I'm lower than this other person, right? Even though objectively their standing in society was better than the pharaoh by the technology they had. So all that to say is like to your point, a lot of the happiness stuff is inward. I think too, if you like obsess about it and focus on it too much, that also, it's like the happiness or a lot of the joy, going back to the meats thing, is it's not the specific thing needs to happen. It's your presence around that. Like you can find joy in a lot of different emotional states and beings. Like a lot of people look back on shitty times in their life with a really like rose colored glass and be like, wow, that was amazing. And in that same way, it's like a lot of the beneficial things in your life aren't necessarily dictated by the objective things that happen. It's your perception around them, which, yeah, going to your point, that's really what I think happiness
mm.
is the presence, enjoying the moment, taking the things that, whatever they are and taking them at face value and finding, a way to perceive that benefits you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the goal of this podcast is to merge those worlds, like creating a culture that thinks it's cool to both be really activated and powerful in the outer world, whatever that means to you, while also being really deeply tapped in to ourselves and be able to notice like, oh, how is my perspective altering my experience and how can I alter my perspective of myself and the situation in order to receive the situation with the most grace and joy. And so yeah, I appreciate you being willing to go into those depths with me too.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of those things are interconnected too. Like if you're good and present and really good, um, the more you practice meditation, the more that'll probably help your focus. The more you're focused, the less you're going to be distracted, the more money you're going to make in business. The more money you make in business, you're going to get put in a lot of scenarios that test you, which is going to help you on a spiritual level, right? I think a
Mm,
lot of these things are kind of like interconnected in a way. So, um, yeah, those are a lot of the things I prioritize too. It's just being good at the external stuff, internal stuff, and you know, doing it all.
totally,
So
that's a great point. And I know you have a hard stop soon. I want to just leave the audience with one more idea from you, which is more geared towards people who maybe are just starting in business or have started but are earlier in the path than you, and they want to know, okay, what's like one thing that I should keep with me or add on to my experience, and what's one thing that I should make sure that I avoid in order to be successful? What would you say?
You said on a business level?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say a lot of it depends on your journey, and there's plenty of people ahead of me, so take their advice. But for the people that are, at a beginner stage, I would say the main thing is track your outputs, track direct. Like if you want to see your results, track the outputs that you're doing, not in terms of volume or the actual activity, not the stuff that's going on in your brain. And I'll also say join a community. Like find somewhere where you're surrounded by like-minded people. Biggest lever of growth for me was being surrounded by a bunch of other people who are making good amounts of money, because then you can realize it's possible. The stuff I leave behind is like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like negative beliefs, like Corsair scam, business scam, whatever, whatever. You can get into a lot of like belief level stuff. But yeah, if you want to be successful, at least in my view, some of the best things you can do is just be persistent, be relentless, track your outputs, and try and surround yourself with other people doing the same thing.
Brilliant. Thank you, man. That's a perfect ending point. We'll leave people with that. And yeah, I appreciate you chopping it up with me.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me.